Hi everyone! Today we're talking about the ESTP personality type. What are the letters that describe this type? What are the cognitive functions that are specific to the ESTP personality? What are the strengths and weaknesses of this type? And what other personality types does the ESTP naturally relate to? All about that in the next minutes. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and let's dive in. Okay, so now let's get a little bit into detail about the letters that describe this personality type. Again, guys, please do not forget that letters only show us some part of our personality. They only describe some of our tendencies, and it's actually the cognitive functions that enable us to dig deeper and understand how a personality type unfolds. But just for an idea, ESTP stands for E, so extraverted, which means that the ESTP is more likely to draw their energy from the outside world, interacting with the outside world. Then we have S, which stands for sensing. This means that when it comes to processing information, an ESTP is simply more likely to focus on concrete, practical, pragmatic aspects rather than the very philosophical perspectives about life and ideas and concepts and so on. Then we have T, which stands for thinking. This means that in the decision-making process, ESTPs are simply more likely to prioritize objective aspects. So of course they also care about emotions and values. It's just that naturally they find it easier to focus on logic and facts and objective criteria. And lastly, we have P, which stands for perceiving. This means that when it comes to organizing their reality, ESTPs are more likely to prefer a more spontaneous, flexible environment rather than an environment which is very rigid, very fixed, with a lot of structures and deadlines. They function better when there's more flexibility and spontaneity. Okay, so how about cognitive functions? Well, the dominant function of the ESTP personality is extraverted sensing. If you remember, we've talked about this function quite a lot in previous videos, such as ISTP, ESFP, INFJ, ENFJ, and so on. Extraverted sensing is all about taking action. It's about living in the moment. It's about understanding what is going on right here, right now. It's about looking for experiences and being curious to explore reality in a more physical, practical, pragmatic way. And because this is the dominant function of the ESTP personality, it's something that dominates the way they relate to the world. If you've met probably ESTPs, it's very likely that you've noticed how keen they are to trying out new things all the time. Especially if we're talking about adventurous things, especially if we're talking about sports, outdoor activities, trying out new food, trying out, traveling to different places, because it stimulates them. And this is something that makes them happy, because someone asked me this on Instagram: what makes an ESTP happy? Well, the ability to try out new things, to embark on a lot of different experiences and be adrenaline filled as well as adventurous, it's something that matters a great deal to the ESTP personality. It's their dominant function, so in a way it's something that comes very naturally to them, something that they might be quite good at, but at the same time it can become a little bit too much when the ESTP focuses too much on this function in such a way that they really jump into action without thinking about it. And this can lead to promiscuous behavior, it can lead to exaggerations of different kinds, and it can lead to them really doing things that could hurt other people or could put them at risk, because they don't really think through those things before they act. And this happens specifically in younger, less mature ESTPs, in their more raw form, let's say. Secondly, the auxiliary function of the ESTP personality is introverted thinking. Again, this is a function we've discussed previously, especially in videos like ISTP or INTP or ENTP. Introverted thinking is a function that is concerned with what works for oneself. And it's the auxiliary function of the ESTP, so this means they tend to use it in a healthy way. It's something that comes naturally to them. It's something that has developed quite early on in their lives, but it's not their dominant function, so most of the time they're not so obsessed with it. They don't use it in an exaggerated manner. So this means that an ESTP will be quite good at making objective decisions and putting into account what are the pros and cons in a more objective, logical way. and they tend to be quite good at logical analysis. Although extroverted sensing and their very risky behavior can sometimes overcloud this ability to be rational, logical, and analytical about things. And someone asked me here, how come ESTPs have so much energy? Well, I would say these two functions together, extroverted sensing and introverted thinking, can actually make one quite fidgety, quite likely to be on the go all the time, because their extroverted sensing is stimulated by what is happening around them. The extroverted sensing really enjoys trying out new experiences, and this is something that energizes them rather than tires them out, as it can happen with other personality types, especially those who have extroverted sensing somewhere further down their cognitive function stack. Then we have the tertiary function of the ESTP personality, which is extroverted feeling. Again, we've talked about this function quite a lot in videos like INFJ, ENFJ, ESFJ, ISFJ, and so on. Extroverted feeling is a function that is primarily concerned with what is important to other people. What are the feelings, what are the values of other people? This is not the dominant or the auxiliary function of the ESTP, so it might not be, let's say, the easiest for them to use it. However, it's not their inferior one either. So let's say that an ESTP who learns to develop themselves a little bit, who grows in maturity, will be much better at balancing out between thinking and feeling. So making decisions in such a way that they take into account both objective and subjective aspects in a rather balanced way, but especially when it comes to the feelings of other people. So as they grow and mature, ESTPs actually discover their more empathetic, their softer side, which enables them to connect with people on a deeper level. And lastly, we have introverted intuition. This is the soft spot of the ESTP, the demon function, something that they are not necessarily very in tune with, and it's probably the function that they will have most difficulty developing, which is the case for everyone with their inferior function. And introverted intuition is all about understanding how concepts can be organized and thinking about the abstract world in such a way that you can classify information quite well. Introverted intuition is quite good at pulling all of that information together and being able to come up with one single coherent conclusion. It's quite good at insights and understanding concepts in a rather deep way. And it's a very unconscious process as well. And this is the opposite of extroverted sensing. So this means that the ESTP will need to let go a little bit of extroverted sensing and actually use their introverted intuition in such a way that they can actually think about the future, in such a way that they can plan and organize things rather than simply act very fast all the time. And being able to reach a balance between these two functions can actually be very helpful for them. To be able to sometimes act and push things and move things, something that comes very naturally to them, but at the same time finding those situations where they can actually plan, where they can actually organize things before acting and think about the more long-term implications of their decisions, because introverted intuition is something that can handle this quite well. Someone also asked me on Instagram, how come ESTPs look cool all the time? I found it funny because yes, it's true that a lot of ESTPs might have this very cool appearance, and this is probably because they tend to focus a lot on this extroverted sensing side. They focus a lot on living in the moment, they focus a lot on what is going on right here, right now, and they also tend to be quite engaged with what their senses tell them. So because of that, they can actually be quite good at, for example, choosing clothes that look good on them or putting on makeup that suits them well, and all of these things because they are probably one of the types that are most aware of appearance and how things look and what kind of things are stimulating to the senses. And this applies to food, for example. They might be quite happy to always taste new things and try out new spices and other things that stimulates their senses, because this is something that is exciting and meaningful to their extroverted sensing. And lastly, how about type compatibilities? Someone asked me this on Instagram, and it's something that we consistently talk about in this series of personality talks. When it comes to the ESTP personality, the MBTI theory says that ESTPs get along best with other types that have sensing as a dominant function. So these would be fellow ESFPs, but also ISFJs and ISTJs. And stereotypically speaking, ESTPs get along very well with ISFJs due to the fact that they both use extroverted feeling and introverted thinking. However, my perception is that when it comes to any personality type, there is a very interesting relational dynamic with other personality types that have the same set of 4 cognitive functions, because this leads to a more deeper understanding of the other one. So in this case, we are talking about ISTP, ENFJ, and INFJ. These are the other 3 personality types who make use of introverted intuition, extroverted sensing, as well as extroverted feeling and introverted thinking. On the other hand, if we are to take into account those personality types that the ESTP finds it most difficult to relate to, these would be INFPs and ENFPs. And this is because all of their cognitive functions are opposite from each other, at the same time, ENFPs and INFPs are quite focused on intuition and feeling rather than sensing and thinking. So, of course, they can have successful relationships with each other. It just means that it might be a little bit more difficult for these types to get along well, to understand each other and communicate in a very effective way. Because the opposition of extroverted sensing, extroverted intuition, as well as introverted thinking with introverted feeling, can cause a little bit of difficulty in getting deeper and understanding how the other person thinks and how the other person relates to the world. So thank you guys, thank you a lot for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please don't forget to like and subscribe, and see you next week with another video on the other personality type.